I thought the worst betrayal was when my husband died 2 years ago, leaving me alone in our empty house. But sitting in that Toledo courthouse 12 years later, watching my own daughter, Jessica, point her manicured finger at me, while her slick lawyer declared I had kidnapped 4 innocent children, I realized betrayal could cut even deeper. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his weathered face creased with confusion, as he examined the yellowed envelope I clutched in my trembling hands. "Mrs. Patterson," he said slowly, "do they know about this?" I glanced at the 4 young adults sitting behind me, my heart breaking as I whispered, "Not yet, Your Honor." The envelope contained the truth about that April afternoon 12 years ago when Jessica dropped off her children for what she promised would be just 1 hour. 12 years earlier, I had been tending my small garden behind our modest ranch home in suburban Toledo when Jessica's beaten-up Honda pulled into my driveway with a grinding screech. The April afternoon was crisp, and I remember pulling off my gardening gloves as I watched 4 small figures tumble out of the back seat like puppies escaping a crate. Brandon, 8 years old with his father's stubborn cowlick, emerged first, his school clothes wrinkled and stained with something I couldn't identify. 6-year-old Chloe followed, clutching a headless doll and wearing mismatched shoes. The 4-year-old twins, Mason and Madison, held hands as they stumbled onto my lawn, their faces smudged with what looked like dried cereal. "Mom, thank God you're home," Jessica called out, her voice carrying that familiar edge of desperation I'd learned to recognize over the years. She hurried around the car, her movements jerky and erratic, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. "I need you to watch the kids for about an hour, maybe 2 tops. Derek's got this emergency situation at work, and I have to help him sort it out." I studied my daughter's appearance as she spoke. Her once beautiful auburn hair hung in greasy strands around her hollow cheeks, and dark circles shadowed her green eyes. She wore the same outfit I'd seen her in 3 weeks earlier when she'd stopped by to ask for grocery money, a faded sweater that hung loose on her shrinking frame. "Jessica, honey, what kind of emergency requires both of you?" I asked, reaching down to smooth Madison's tangled blonde curls. The little girl leaned into my touch like a flower turning toward sunlight. "It's complicated, Mom. Business stuff. You wouldn't understand." She was already backing toward the car, fumbling in her oversized purse for something. "There's a diaper bag in the trunk with some snacks and extra clothes. I'll be back before dinner, I promise." I wanted to ask more questions, but Brandon tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma Tabitha, can we have something to eat? We didn't have breakfast, and lunch was just crackers Derek found in his glove compartment." My heart clenched. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's get everyone inside and see what we can find in the kitchen." Jessica had already popped the trunk and was dragging out a small canvas bag that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. She thrust it into my arms without making eye contact. "Here's their stuff. Brandon knows their routines. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver." Before I could respond, she was sliding back into the driver's seat. The engine turned over with a coughing protest, and she backed out of the driveway so quickly that gravel sprayed across my driveway. I stood there for a moment, watching her taillights disappear around the corner of Maple Street, while 4 pairs of eyes looked up at me expectantly. The diaper bag felt surprisingly light in my hands. "All right, children," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Let's go inside and see about getting some proper food in your bellies." The next few hours revealed the extent of their neglect. When I opened the diaper bag, I found only 3 diapers, a half-empty bottle of juice, and a package of stale crackers. No change of clothes, no toys, no comfort items except for Chloe's damaged doll. In my kitchen, I watched them devour peanut butter sandwiches like they hadn't eaten in days. Mason kept checking over his shoulder toward the front door, as if expecting someone to burst in and take his food away. Madison methodically saved half her sandwich, wrapping it carefully in the napkin I'd given her. "Sweetheart, you can eat all of that," I told her gently. "There's plenty more food here." She shook her head solemnly. "Mama says we always have to save some for later in case there's no more tomorrow." The innocence of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood there for several minutes, gripping the edge of the sink as I struggled to process what these children had been living through. When bath time came, I discovered they were all wearing clothes, several sizes too small, and their hair was matted with neglect. But they splashed and giggled in my old clawfoot tub like it was the most wonderful place on earth, and I realized it might have been their first proper bath in weeks. I put them to bed in my spare room, spreading blankets on the floor to make a cozy nest, since I only had one twin bed. They curled up together like a litter of kittens, and Chloe whispered a prayer thanking God for food and warm water. The first call to Jessica's phone went straight to voicemail. So did the second and third. By midnight, I was pacing my living room, leaving increasingly worried messages. By morning, when I called again, the number was disconnected. I spent the second day making phone calls. Jessica's landlord at her last known apartment told me she'd been evicted 6 weeks earlier for non-payment of rent. Her former employer said she'd stopped showing up 3 months ago. Even Derek's construction company had never heard of him. On the third day, I drove to every address I could think of, checking homeless shelters and asking Jessica's old friends if they'd seen her. The children came with me, quiet and well-behaved, in the back seat of my sedan, clutching the new coloring books I'd bought them. That evening, I finally called the police. Officer Martinez was kind but realistic. "Ma'am, we see this more often than you'd think. Young mothers get overwhelmed, especially when drugs are involved. Sometimes they just run. If she doesn't contact you in the next week, we can file a missing person report, but honestly, she might have just needed space." I wanted to argue to insist that my Jessica would never abandon her children permanently, but the evidence was mounting against that hope. The children seemed less surprised by their mother's absence than I was. They adapted to my routines, with an ease that suggested they'd learned to be flexible out of necessity. A week later, I was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was Officer Martinez with news that made my hands shake. Derek's car had been found abandoned at the Greyhound bus station downtown. Jessica's purse was still inside, along with her identification and a crumpled piece of notebook paper with 4 words scrawled in her handwriting: "I can't do this anymore." I sank onto my sofa, staring at the children playing quietly with blocks on my living room floor. Brandon looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that seemed far too old for his 8-year-old face. "Is Mama coming back?" he asked. For the first time since this ordeal began, I answered with complete honesty. "I don't know, sweetheart, but you're safe here with me, and that's what matters right now." He nodded and returned to building his tower as if he'd expected that answer all along. In that moment, I realized these children had been preparing for abandonment long before it actually happened, and my heart broke for their lost innocence, even as it swelled with determination to give them the security they deserved. The social services office smelled like disinfectant and desperation, but Margaret Walsh, the caseworker assigned to our situation, had kind eyes behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She sat across from me in a cramped conference room, reviewing the stack of paperwork I'd brought, documenting Jessica's disappearance and the children's current living situation. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask some difficult questions." She began, her voice gentle but professional. "Are you prepared for the financial responsibility of caring for 4 children on your teacher's pension?" I straightened my shoulders, thinking of the life insurance money from Robert's death that still sat untouched in my savings account. I'd been planning to use it for a cruise or maybe renovations to the house, but those dreams seemed trivial now. "I have adequate resources," I replied firmly. My late husband was a careful planner. We never had children of our own, but he always said that money should be used for family when it matters most. Margaret made notes in her file. "And you understand this could be a long-term arrangement. Even if your daughter returns, there would need to be extensive evaluation before the children could be placed back in her care." Through the conference room window, I could see Brandon pushing Madison on the playground swing, while Chloe and Mason collected dandelions in a paper cup. They'd been living with me for 6 weeks, and the transformation was remarkable. Brandon's angry outbursts had decreased as his sleep schedule stabilized. Chloe had started humming while she colored a sound I'd never heard from her before. The twins were gaining weight and had stopped hoarding food in their bedroom. "I understand completely," I told Margaret. "These children need consistency and security. whatever legal steps are necessary to ensure that I'm prepared to take them. The emergency custody hearing 2 weeks later felt surreal. I sat in the same courthouse where I'd later face Jessica's accusations, wearing my best navy dress and clutching a folder full of documentation about the children's progress. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Coleman, reviewed the case with obvious concern. "Mrs. Patterson, the court appreciates your willingness to provide temporary care for these children, but I need to understand your long-term commitment. Emergency custody can become permanent custody if the biological parent doesn't resume responsibility within a reasonable time frame." "Your Honor, I've already consulted with a family law attorney about adoption procedures," I replied. "If Jessica doesn't return or is deemed unfit when she does return, I want to ensure these children have permanent legal security with me." Judge Coleman nodded approvingly. "The court will grant emergency custody for 6 months with review hearings every 60 days. Social services will conduct regular evaluations to ensure the children's well-being." Walking out of that courthouse with legal custody papers felt like the most important victory of my life. The children were waiting in the hallway with my sister Dorothy, who had driven down from Detroit to provide moral support despite her initial skepticism about my decision. "So it's official?" Brandon asked, his voice carefully neutral in that way children use when they're afraid to hope too much. I knelt down to his eye level, looking at each of their faces in turn. "You're officially stuck with me for at least 6 months, and hopefully much longer if you can tolerate my cooking and my terrible jokes." Madison giggled a sound like silver bells that I'd been hearing more frequently as she learned to trust that good things could last. "Your jokes aren't terrible, Grandma Tabby. They're just really, really bad." The transition into our new normal required adjustments none of us had anticipated. My 2-bedroom house suddenly felt cramped, with 4 additional occupants, but we made it work with creative space planning. The spare room became the girls' domain, decorated with posters Chloe had drawn of imaginary families having picnics and building snowmen. The boys shared the finished basement where Brandon helped me set up bunk beds and a study area. Enrolling them in school presented its own challenges. Brandon tested 2 grade levels above his age in reading, but struggled with basic math concepts due to inconsistent education. Chloe showed artistic talent that her previous teachers had never recognized because she'd been too anxious to participate in class activities. The twins needed speech therapy to address developmental delays caused by neglect during crucial early years. The first parent-teacher conferences were enlightening and heartbreaking. Mrs. Rodriguez, Brandon's 3rd grade teacher, pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what you're doing at home, Mrs. Patterson, but Brandon is a completely different child than he was 6 weeks ago. He used to fight with other students and refused to complete assignments. Now he's helping classmates with their reading and turning in homework early." Similar reports came from all their teachers. Chloe had joined the art club and was working on illustrations for the school literary magazine. Mason had made his first real friend, a boy named Timothy, who lived 3 blocks away. Madison was already showing leadership qualities, organizing playground games and mediating disputes between classmates. But the real magic happened at home during our evening routines. After homework and dinner came story time, where I read classics like Charlotte's Web and The Secret Garden, while they snuggled around me on the living room sofa. Brandon always sat closest, unconsciously taking on his role as protector, even while allowing himself to be protected. Our first Christmas together approached with careful planning and deliberate joy-making. I'd never had to think about Santa Claus or stockings or the logistics of gift-giving for 4 children with different interests and needs. Dorothy came for Christmas Eve dinner, bringing homemade tamales and a grudging admission that I'd made the right decision. "I thought you were crazy, Tabitha," she said while we watched the children perform an improvised nativity play, using kitchen towels and my ceramic figurines. "4 kids at your age with everything you've been through losing Robert. But look at them. Look at you. You're all glowing." She was right. Despite the exhaustion and financial strain, I felt more alive than I had since Robert's death. These children had given me purpose beyond my grief, and I'd given them something they'd never had: unconditional stability. The only shadow over our happiness was the private investigator I'd hired to find Jessica. Thomas Brennan was a former police detective who specialized in missing persons cases, and his monthly reports always contained the same disappointing conclusion. No credible leads, no evidence of Jessica's whereabouts, no indication she was attempting to contact her children. "It's like she vanished completely," he told me during one of our phone conversations. "I've checked databases in 37 states, contacted shelters and rehabilitation facilities, even checked morgue records. Either she's very good at staying hidden, or she's found a way to live completely off the grid." The children asked about their mother less frequently as months passed, but the questions never disappeared entirely. Madison had started having nightmares about being left alone in parking lots. Chloe drew pictures of stick figure families where the mother was always missing or drawn in pencil that had been erased. Brandon appointed himself as my assistant for everything from grocery shopping to bill paying, as if ensuring our household ran smoothly would prevent another abandonment. But we were building something real and lasting together. Our photo albums began filling with pictures of school plays and soccer games, family camping trips to Lake Erie, and quiet Sunday mornings making pancakes shaped like animals. The children stopped flinching when I hugged them goodbye for school, stopped hoarding snacks in their bedrooms, stopped asking permission to use the bathroom or get drinks of water. One evening in late spring, almost a year after Jessica's disappearance, I was tucking Madison into bed when she looked up at me with those serious blue eyes that reminded me so much of Jessica at that age. "Grandma Tabby, do you think Mama knows we're happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Well, if she's watching us from somewhere, do you think she's glad we're not scared anymore? Or do you think she's sad that we stopped waiting for her to come back?" I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "I think anyone who truly loves you would want you to feel safe and happy no matter what. And I think your mama, wherever she is, would be proud of how brave and kind you've all become." Madison nodded solemnly and closed her eyes, but I sat there long after she fell asleep, wondering if I was doing the right thing by letting them build lives that didn't include room for their mother's return. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of a birthday card addressed to all 4 children postmarked from Toledo, but with no return address. Inside was a generic message about growing up strong and happy, signed only with a heart symbol. The private investigator confirmed the handwriting was Jessica's, which meant she was somewhere nearby watching us from a distance, but still choosing not to make contact. I never showed the children that card. They were thriving in ways I'd never dreamed possible when Jessica first disappeared, and I wasn't going to disrupt their healing with false hope or confused emotions about a mother who could observe their lives but couldn't bring herself to participate in them. Instead, I framed their school photos from that spring and hung them in the hallway where I'd see their smiling faces every morning. Brandon with his Academic Achievement Award, Chloe holding the painting that won the district art contest, Mason and Madison in their matching soccer uniforms after their first successful season. We were becoming a real family built not on biology, but on daily choices to love and protect and nurture each other. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we could face them together. The courthouse steps felt familiar under my feet as I walked out with permanent custody papers 3 years after Jessica's disappearance. Judge Coleman had reviewed our case with obvious satisfaction, noting the children's academic progress, psychological evaluations showing healthy adjustment, and my consistent provision of stable care. "Mrs. Patterson, it's rare to see such a positive outcome in abandonment cases," she'd said during the brief hearing. "These children are fortunate to have you." But I knew the truth was more complex. I was the fortunate one. These 4 remarkable young people had taught me that family isn't defined by how it begins, but by how it chooses to continue growing together. Brandon, now 11, had grown 3 inches in the past year and showed the same quiet determination that had helped him survive his early chaos. His football coach pulled me aside after practice one autumn afternoon to discuss Brandon's potential for athletic scholarships, but I was more proud of the way he tutored struggling classmates after school and helped Mason with homework without being asked. Chloe had blossomed into a confident artist whose work decorated not just our refrigerator, but the school hallways and local library bulletin boards. At 9, she'd already won 2 regional contests and been invited to attend a summer arts program at the Toledo Museum of Art. But her greatest gift wasn't artistic talent. It was her ability to comfort younger children who were dealing with family difficulties. Teachers often asked her to befriend new students who seemed lost or scared. The twins, now 7, had developed distinct personalities that complemented each other perfectly. Mason had overcome his early speech delays to become the family comedian, always ready with silly voices and improvised skits that could dissolve any tension. His teacher, Mrs. Franklin, told me he had a gift for making every child in class feel included and valued. Madison had emerged as a natural leader with an innate sense of justice that sometimes got her into trouble. She organized playground campaigns against bullying, started a recycling program in her classroom, and once convinced her entire grade to donate their Halloween candy to homeless shelters. Her fierce protectiveness extended especially to her siblings, and I'd learned to watch for that particular set, to her jaw that meant someone had threatened her family. Our house had evolved to accommodate their growing independence and changing needs. The basement became Brandon's retreat where he could study for advanced placement courses and practice guitar without disturbing anyone. The girls' room now featured separate spaces reflecting their individual interests. Chloe's art supplies organized in careful rows, Madison's books about social justice and animal rights stacked beside her bed. We'd established traditions that anchored our family identity. Sunday pancake breakfasts where everyone contributed to cooking and cleaning. Annual camping trips to Maumee Bay State Park where we told ghost stories and Brandon taught the twins to identify constellations. Holiday celebrations that blended old customs with new ones we created together. The children had developed their own ways of honoring their missing mother while accepting the reality of their current family. Chloe drew pictures of 5-person families where one figure stood apart but still connected by rainbow bridges or heart-shaped clouds. Madison kept a small photo of Jessica in her jewelry box, explaining to me once that it helped her remember where she came from while appreciating where she was going. But there were still moments that reminded me how their early trauma had shaped them in ways we couldn't completely heal. Brandon still checked all the door locks before bed and kept a baseball bat beside his bed just in case. Chloe sometimes packed snacks in her backpack even for half-day school events, unable to fully trust that food would always be available when she needed it. The twins held hands during thunderstorms and any unexpected loud noises, an instinctive comfort behavior that dated back to whatever frightening experiences they'd endured before coming to me. My own life had been transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. At 62, I found myself attending parent-teacher conferences for advanced calculus and elementary art classes in the same week. I learned to navigate teenage emotions and playground politics, to negotiate bedtime routines with 4 different sleep patterns, to budget for everything from football equipment to art supplies to orthodontic appointments. Dating became complicated and ultimately irrelevant. I'd gone out for coffee twice with William Henderson, a widowed man from my church, but realized my heart was completely occupied with the family I'd unexpectedly acquired. The children needed all my emotional energy, and I discovered that nurturing their growth was more fulfilling than any romantic relationship could have been. My sister Dorothy had become an invaluable support system, visiting monthly from Detroit and serving as an auxiliary grandmother figure. She taught Chloe to knit, helped Brandon research colleges that offered both academic and athletic opportunities, and provided the kind of extended family stability that reinforced our growing sense of permanence. "You know what amazes me most?" Dorothy said during one of our evening conversations while the children did homework. "They don't act like kids who've been abandoned. They act like kids who've been chosen." She was right. Despite their traumatic beginning, these children had developed confidence and resilience that served them well in school and social situations. Teachers consistently praised their empathy, maturity, and willingness to help others. Friends' parents often remarked on their politeness and self-sufficiency. But there were still signs that we were being watched, small things that I tried to dismiss as coincidence or imagination. Toys moved in our backyard overnight. A car parked across the street for hours at a time before driving away when I looked out the window. Phone calls where no one spoke when I answered just breathing, and then disconnection. I never mentioned these incidents to the children, but I began varying our routines and paying closer attention to our surroundings. The private investigator's contract had expired with no results, but I installed a basic security system and made sure the children understood basic safety protocols without frightening them. The incidents escalated during the children's 6th year with me. I was folding laundry in the basement when I heard footsteps on the front porch, but when I reached the living room, no one was there. The mail had been rifled through letters scattered on the porch instead of neatly stacked in the mailbox as usual. Mason, now 10, noticed things too. "Grandma Tabby, why does that same blue car drive past our house every Tuesday after school? It never stops anywhere else on our street." I began keeping a log of suspicious incidents, noting dates and details in case a pattern emerged. The blue sedan appeared weekly. Our garbage can was searched every few weeks, contents scattered, but nothing taken. Someone had walked through our backyard garden, leaving footprints in the soft soil around my tomato plants. The most disturbing incident occurred on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I was helping Madison with a science project when I heard our garage door grinding open. The children were all inside with me, and I knew I hadn't activated the door opener. By the time I looked outside, the door was closed again and our cars were undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been searching for something. That night, after the children were asleep, I called the police. Officer Garcia was professional, but limited in what she could do without evidence of actual criminal activity. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your concerns, especially given your family situation. We'll increase patrol frequency in your neighborhood, but unless you can identify specific threats or catch someone in the act of trespassing, our options are limited." I knew she was right, but the watching felt increasingly intrusive and deliberate. Someone was keeping track of our family's routines and activities, and the only person with motivation to conduct such surveillance was Jessica. The children began noticing my increased vigilance despite my efforts to hide it. During one of our Sunday pancake breakfasts, Chloe looked up from her plate with those perceptive artist's eyes. "Grandma Tabby, are you worried about something? You keep checking the windows and doors more than usual." I set down my spatula and looked at these 4 young people who'd become the center of my world. They deserved honesty, but they also deserved protection from fears that might be groundless. "I've noticed some unusual activity in our neighborhood lately," I said carefully. "Nothing dangerous, just things that don't quite fit normal patterns. I want to make sure our family stays safe, so I'm being extra cautious." Brandon straightened in his chair, his protective instincts immediately activated. "What kind of unusual activity? Should we be doing something different?" "Just the usual safety awareness we've always practiced. Walk in groups, tell me where you're going. Don't talk to strangers who ask questions about our family. And if you notice anything that makes you uncomfortable, tell me immediately." They all nodded seriously, but I could see the worry settling behind their eyes. These children had lived through abandonment and uncertainty before coming to me, and they recognized the signs of adult anxiety even when I tried to hide them. That evening, as I tucked Madison into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "Whatever's wrong, we'll handle it together right. That's what families do." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but also strength. She was absolutely right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them. As the family, we'd become united, protective of each other, and stronger together than any of us could be alone. I just wished I could shake the feeling that our period of peaceful growth was about to end, and that whoever was watching us was preparing to disrupt the life we'd built together. The first photograph appeared in Chloe's backpack on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She was 14 now, working part-time at Sullivan's ice cream parlor after school, and saving money for art supplies that my budget couldn't quite stretch to cover. When she pulled out her algebra homework, a Polaroid picture fluttered to the kitchen table. It showed her walking out of school the previous Friday, captured from across the parking lot with a telephoto lens. She was laughing with her friend Amanda, backpack slung over one shoulder, completely unaware she was being photographed. Chloe, where did this come from? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. She picked up the photo with confusion creasing her features. I have no idea. I've never seen it before. Maybe someone dropped it and I accidentally picked it up with my books. But I knew better. This was deliberate, a message meant to show that someone was watching her, documenting her daily activities. I slipped the photo into my purse and made a mental note to call the police, but Chloe was already moving on to homework and I didn't want to frighten her with my suspicions. The incidents escalated quickly after that. Brandon, now 17 and a senior, called me from campus during his lunch break at Toledo Community College, where he was taking dual enrollment courses. Grandma Tabby, something weird happened today. I was walking to my car after calculus when this woman approached me in the parking lot. She knew my name and asked if I remembered her. When I said no, she got upset and said I used to call her Mama. Then she just walked away before I could ask any questions. My blood turned to ice water. What did she look like, Brandon? Thin, really thin, with long, dark hair that looked like it needed washing. She was probably in her 40s, but she looked older. Worn out, you know. Her clothes were nice, though, like she was trying to look put together but couldn't quite manage it. The description matched how I imagined Jessica might look after years of hard living, but I couldn't be certain without more information. Did you feel threatened? Did she ask you to go anywhere with her, or give you any contact information? No, nothing like that. She seemed more sad than dangerous. But Grandma Tabby, how did she know my name? How did she know I used to have a different mother? I closed my eyes, realizing this conversation was inevitable, but wishing it could have happened under different circumstances. Brandon, I think it might have been your biological mother. We should talk about this when you get home, all four of you together. That evening's family meeting was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I gathered them in our living room and explained my growing suspicions about the surveillance we'd been experiencing, the mysterious incidents around our house, and now the direct contact with Brandon. Madison, now 15 and fiercely logical, was the first to process the implications. So she's been watching us for months, maybe years, but she's never tried to actually come home or talk to you directly. That doesn't make sense if she really wants to be our mother again. Mental illness could explain inconsistent behavior, Chloe offered quietly. Or maybe she's been in treatment and is trying to work up the courage to approach us properly. Mason, always the peacemaker, looked troubled. But if she's our real mom, shouldn't we want to see her? Shouldn't we be excited that she's finally coming back? Brandon shook his head firmly. Real mothers don't abandon their kids for 8 years and then start stalking them instead of just knocking on the front door. Real mothers raise their children every single day, like Grandma Tabby has done for us. His words filled me with pride, but I knew this situation was becoming too complex and potentially dangerous for me to handle alone. The next morning, I contacted the police with a detailed report of all the incidents, including the photograph and Brandon's encounter. Detective Sarah Morrison took my statement with professional concern. Mrs. Patterson, given the history of abandonment and the current pattern of surveillance, we're going to treat this as potential stalking. Do you have any recent photographs of the biological mother for identification purposes? I provided the private investigator's file, which included Jessica's last known driver's license photo and several images from social media accounts that had been active before her disappearance. Detective Morrison studied them carefully. We'll increase patrol presence around your home and the children's school. I'll also need to speak with each child individually about any contact or suspicious incidents they might not have reported to you. Over the following weeks, the surveillance became more aggressive and obvious. The children started noticing things I'd been trying to protect them from. Mason spotted the same woman sitting in various cars on our street, always watching the house. Madison found her locker at school had been opened, contents rearranged, but nothing missing. Chloe's supervisor at the ice cream parlor called me one evening with disturbing news. Mrs. Patterson, a woman came in today asking detailed questions about Chloe's work schedule and whether she walked home alone. When I wouldn't give out information about our employees, she became agitated and claimed to be Chloe's mother. I thought you should know. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night in April. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when motion sensor lights activated in our backyard. Through the window, I could see a figure moving near our garden shed, using a flashlight to examine something. I called 911 and then gathered the children in my bedroom while we waited for police response. Brandon positioned himself by the window with his baseball bat while the twins huddled together on my bed, and Chloe held my hand tightly. "Is it her?" Madison whispered. "Is it our mother?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but whoever it is, they don't belong in our yard at midnight." Police arrived within 10 minutes and conducted a thorough search of the property. They found footprints around the shed and discovered the padlock had been cut. Inside, several items had been moved, and there were signs someone had been using the space for shelter on multiple occasions. Detective Morrison examined the evidence with growing concern. "Mrs. Patterson, whoever's been watching your family, has escalated to trespassing and property damage. I'm recommending you consider temporary relocation until we can identify and apprehend the suspect." The thought of uprooting the children from the home where they'd found security and happiness felt like letting the stalker win, but I couldn't ignore the increasing boldness of the surveillance. We packed bags and moved temporarily to Dorothy's house in Detroit, where the children could continue attending school online while we waited for resolution. But even in Detroit, we couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Dorothy's neighbor reported seeing a woman in a dark sedan driving slowly past the house multiple times, sometimes stopping to take photographs. The license plate was traced to a rental car company, but the rental agreement had been signed with false identification. After 2 weeks of living in limbo, I made the decision to return home with enhanced security measures. I installed cameras around our property, upgraded all door and window locks, and arranged for a private security service to conduct regular patrols of our neighborhood. The children were relieved to be back in familiar surroundings, but the atmosphere had changed. They moved in groups, checked over their shoulders regularly, and lost some of the carefree confidence they'd developed over their years with me. Brandon took on the role of family protector with increased intensity, walking his siblings to and from school, and insisting on accompanying them to all social activities. "I hate that she's stealing our peace," Madison said one evening as we watched television together. "We finally had a normal family, and now we're all scared again." Her words captured exactly what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Jessica's stalking wasn't just threatening our physical safety, it was undermining the emotional security we'd spent years building together. 3 weeks after our return home, Detective Morrison called with an update that confirmed our worst fears. "Mrs. Patterson, we've identified your stalker through security camera footage from a local shopping center. It is Jessica Patterson, the children's biological mother. She's been living in a rented room about 15 miles from your house, and she appears to have been conducting surveillance for approximately 8 months." The confirmation brought mixed emotions. On one hand, knowing the stalker's identity felt like regaining some control over the situation. On the other hand, realizing Jessica had been watching us for months without making contact raised troubling questions about her mental state and intentions. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're pursuing stalking charges, but Mrs. Patterson, there's something else you need to know. Jessica hasn't been acting alone. She's been accompanied by a man who claims to be her attorney, and they've been asking questions around town about your family's financial situation and the children's inheritance prospects." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about maternal longing or mental illness. This was about money, specifically the trust funds I'd established for each child using Robert's life insurance proceeds, and my careful savings over the years. Someone had been researching our family's assets, and Jessica's sudden reappearance after 8 years of silence wasn't motivated by love for her children. It was motivated by greed, and that realization made her infinitely more dangerous than a mentally ill stalker acting alone. That night, as I lay awake listening to the house settle around us, I realized our period of quiet family happiness was over. Jessica was planning something that went far beyond surveillance, and I needed to prepare for a battle I'd never imagined fighting. The children's safety and security depended on my ability to outmaneuver a daughter who had proven herself capable of abandoning her children once and was now ready to exploit them for financial gain. Whatever came next, I would be ready to protect the family we'd built together, even if it meant facing down the woman who had given them life but had never learned to love them unconditionally. The doorbell rang at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in May, jolting me awake from restless sleep. I grabbed my robe and hurried to the front door, checking the security camera display that showed a rain-soaked figure hunched on my porch. Even through the distorted video feed, I recognized the gaunt frame and stringy hair that had haunted my family for months. Jessica stood there, swaying slightly, looking more like a lost child than a 40-year-old woman. "Please, Mom," she called through the door, her voice cracking with desperation. "I need help. There are people trying to hurt me, and I just want to see my babies. Please don't turn me away." Behind me, I heard movement as the children woke to the sound of voices. Brandon appeared, first followed quickly by the others, all of them staring at the door with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Is that really her?" Chloe whispered, clutching her bathrobe around her shoulders. I looked at my 4 young adults, these precious people who'd become my world, and made a decision that would define our family's future. I opened the door with the chain lock still engaged just enough to speak directly to the daughter I hadn't seen in 8 years. Jessica looked terrible. Her face was hollow and aged beyond her years, her clothes expensive but ill-fitting, as if she'd lost significant weight recently. But her eyes held a calculating quality that contradicted her desperate words. "Jessica, what do you want?" I asked quietly. "I want my children, Mom. I've been clean for 2 years now. I have a job, an apartment, a lawyer who's helping me get my life back together. I made mistakes, but I'm different now. I'm ready to be their mother." Behind me, I heard Madison's sharp intake of breath. The twins were holding hands, and Chloe had moved closer to Brandon, as if seeking protection from this stranger who claimed to be their mother. "Where have you been for 8 years, Jessica? Why didn't you contact us if you were getting your life together?" Tears streamed down her face, but they looked rehearsed somehow. "I was ashamed, Mom. I knew what I'd done was unforgivable. I had to get completely clean and stable before I could face them. But I'm ready now. I have rights as their mother." Before I could respond, a man emerged from a dark sedan parked at the curb. He was tall and well-dressed, carrying a briefcase and an air of professional authority. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Derek Hawthorne, Jessica's attorney," he said, approaching the porch with confident steps. "I apologize for the late hour, but we've been trying to arrange a meeting through proper channels. Perhaps we could discuss this situation in a more comfortable setting." Something about his smooth manner set my nerves on edge, but Jessica's pleading expression and the children's obvious confusion made it difficult to simply close the door. Against my better judgment, I invited them inside. The next hour was surreal. Jessica sat on my sofa, surrounded by the children she hadn't seen since they were small, crying and apologizing, while Derek Hawthorne outlined her legal position with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Patterson, while we appreciate the care you've provided for these children, Jessica never voluntarily relinquished her parental rights. Her absence, while regrettable, doesn't constitute legal abandonment under Ohio law if she can demonstrate rehabilitation and current fitness as a parent." He spread documents across my coffee table, certificates from drug rehabilitation programs, employment records from a marketing company in Columbus, lease agreements for a 3-bedroom apartment, psychological evaluations declaring Jessica mentally stable and ready for reunification with her children. The evidence was impressive and overwhelming. Too impressive, I thought, for someone who'd been living on the streets just months ago, according to police reports. "Mom, I know this is shocking," Jessica said, reaching toward Chloe's hand, "but I never stopped loving you kids. I was sick, really sick, and I had to get well before I could be the mother you deserved." Chloe pulled her hand back instinctively. "But you never called or wrote or sent birthday cards. How are we supposed to know you still cared about us?" "I wanted to, sweetheart, but my doctors said contact might confuse your healing process while I was still unstable. I had to focus completely on getting well first." The explanation sounded plausible, but something felt wrong about the timing and presentation. Why appear now after years of silence? Why bring a lawyer instead of approaching us through social services or family court? Derek Hawthorne seemed to read my skepticism. Mrs. Patterson Jessica understands this transition needs to happen gradually. We're not asking for immediate custody transfer. We're proposing supervised visits to allow the family to reconnect, followed by gradual overnight stays as the children become comfortable with their mother. What about school, their friends, their activities? These children have built lives here. I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We're not looking to disrupt their education or social connections, Derek replied smoothly. Jessica has found employment in Toledo specifically so the children can maintain stability while rebuilding their relationship with their mother. Over the following weeks, the supervised visits began. Jessica would arrive every Saturday afternoon with expensive gifts and elaborate plans for outings to amusement parks, shopping malls, and restaurants. She presented herself as the fun, exciting mother who could offer adventures beyond my modest means. The children's reactions were complex and painful to watch. Brandon remained skeptical and protective, often cutting visits short if he felt his siblings were uncomfortable. Chloe was torn between longing for maternal connection and loyalty to me. The twins, who remembered little about Jessica, approached her with polite curiosity but no real emotional attachment. "She doesn't know anything about us," Madison confided to me after one particularly awkward visit. She asked me what my favorite subject was, and when I said social justice, she looked confused. She didn't know Mason plays piano or that Chloe won the state art contest last year. But Derek Hawthorne was building a compelling legal case. He documented every visit, photographed Jessica with the children at various locations, and compiled evidence of her stability and commitment to rebuilding their relationship. The local media picked up the story and portrayed it as a heartwarming tale of redemption and family reunification. Local mother fights to regain custody after years of rehabilitation, read the headline in the Toledo Blade, accompanied by a photograph of Jessica hugging the twins outside a pizza restaurant. Public opinion began shifting in Jessica's favor. Comments on social media praised her courage in seeking treatment and fighting for her children. A few criticized me for being unwilling to support the reunion, questioning whether I was acting in the children's best interests or simply trying to keep them for myself. The pressure mounted when Derek Hawthorne filed formal custody petition papers in family court. Judge Morrison, the same judge who'd granted Jessica's permanent custody years earlier, would hear the case. Mrs. Patterson. Derek explained during a pre-hearing conference, "We're not questioning your excellent care of these children, but Jessica has demonstrated rehabilitation and stability. Ohio law favors reunification of biological families when it's in the children's best interests. I hired my own attorney, Sarah Mitchell, but she was honest about our challenges. Tabitha, unless you can prove current unfitness or danger to the children, the court will likely favor the biological mother who can demonstrate rehabilitation. Your best hope is negotiating shared custody that maintains the children's stability while allowing Jessica to rebuild relationships." The custody evaluation process was exhausting and invasive. Psychologists interviewed each child, separately assessed our home environment, and reviewed years of school records and medical history. Jessica submitted to drug tests, psychological evaluations, and parenting classes, passing everything with flying colors. But late one evening, as I was researching Derek Hawthorne's background for our legal defense, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The Ohio State Bar Association had no record of any attorney named Derek Hawthorne practicing family law in the state. Further investigation revealed that Derek Hawthorne had been a legitimate attorney until 3 years ago when he died in a car accident near Columbus. Someone was using his identity and credentials to practice law illegally. I immediately called Detective Morrison, who confirmed my suspicions with databases that should have been checked weeks earlier. The man claiming to be Derek Hawthorne was actually David Hudson, a convicted con artist with a history of identity theft and fraud schemes targeting families with significant assets. Mrs. Patterson, this changes everything, Detective Morrison said. If Jessica is working with a known criminal to gain custody of children with substantial trust funds, we're looking at a conspiracy that goes far beyond family reunification. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Jessica's perfect rehabilitation documents her sudden appearance. After years of silence, her knowledge of the children's financial situation, and her partnership with a criminal, using a dead lawyer's identity, all pointed to an elaborate con game designed to gain access to the trust funds I'd established for the children. But the custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Jessica had no idea her scheme had been discovered. I faced a terrible choice: expose the truth and shatter any possibility of genuine mother-child reconciliation, or allow the legal process to continue and risk losing the children to criminals who saw them only as financial opportunities. That night, as I watched my 4 young adults sleeping peacefully in the home where they'd found safety and love, I made the decision that would define the rest of our lives together. I would let Jessica and her criminal partner believe their plan was working while secretly building the case that would expose their true motives and protect my family from exploitation. Whatever happened in court, I would make sure these children understood the difference between being wanted for love and being wanted for money. And I would make sure they never again experienced the kind of abandonment that had brought them to me in the first place. The private investigator I'd hired to examine Derek Hawthorne's credentials worked with the efficiency of someone who'd uncovered similar frauds before. Thomas Brennan, the same investigator who'd searched unsuccessfully for Jessica years earlier, sat across from me in his cramped office 3 days before the custody hearing, spreading evidence across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that finally formed a complete picture. "Mrs. Patterson, this is bigger than identity theft," he said, pointing to photographs and documents that detailed David Hudson's criminal history. "This is the 3rd state where he's run this exact scam. In Kentucky, he convinced a grandmother to sign over custody of her grandson by posing as the child's father's attorney. In Indiana, he and a female accomplice gained custody of 2 children with substantial inheritance money and then disappeared. The children were found 6 months later, abandoned in a bus station in Chicago. The photographs showed David Hudson in various disguises and identities, but they all revealed the same cold eyes and calculating expression I'd noticed during his visits to my home. More disturbing were the surveillance photos showing him and Jessica together in restaurants and parking lots, always in intense conversation, always studying documents that looked suspiciously like financial records. "They've been researching your family's assets for almost a year," Brennan continued. "Bank records, insurance policies, property assessments, the children's trust fund values. This isn't about maternal love or family reunification. This is about $250,000 in combined assets that these children will control when they reach 18. I studied the evidence with growing horror and determination. How long before they would have access to the money if Jessica gained custody? As legal guardian, Jessica would control the funds immediately for the children's expenses. There are almost no oversight requirements for how custodial parents spend money designated for children's care. They could drain every account within months and disappear again. The full scope of their plan became clear as Brennan outlined the pattern they'd followed in other states. Gain custody through fraudulent legal representation, access the children's assets through guardian privileges, liquidate everything possible, and vanish with the money while abandoning the children to state protective services. "Mrs. Patterson, there's something else," Brennan said, pulling out a thick folder. "I've been monitoring Jessica's communications since you hired me to verify Derek Hawthorne's identity. She's been in contact with someone about arranging false identities for herself and the children. They're planning to disappear permanently once they have legal custody." The investigative report included transcribed phone calls where Jessica discussed obtaining fake birth certificates and social security numbers for all 4 children. The plan wasn't just financial exploitation, it was complete erasure of their identities and histories, effectively making them disappear from any system that could track or protect them. I felt physically sick imagining Brandon, Chloe, Mason, and Madison trapped in such a scheme, possibly sold to strangers or worse. These children had survived abandonment once and built new lives based on trust and security. To subject them to such betrayal again would destroy them emotionally, even if they survived physically. "What can we do legally?" I asked. "The custody hearing is in 3 days, and Jessica's documentation looks perfect to anyone who doesn't know it's fraudulent." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Detective Morrison is coordinating with federal authorities since this crosses state lines and involves identity theft of a deceased attorney. They want to let the conspiracy proceed until we have enough evidence for prosecution, but that means allowing Jessica to potentially gain custody before making arrests." The thought of those children spending even one night in Jessica's custody, not knowing they were in the hands of criminals, made my hands shake with rage and fear. That evening, I was cleaning out my desk drawer when I found something that stopped my breath entirely. Hidden behind old tax returns was a yellowed envelope I'd completely forgotten about, addressed to me in Jessica's handwriting. It was postmarked the day after she'd disappeared 8 years ago, but somehow I'd never opened it. My hands trembled as I carefully unsealed the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of notebook paper inside. Jessica's familiar scrawl filled the page with words that changed everything I thought I knew about her disappearance. "Mom, by the time you read this, I'll be gone for good. I can't take the kids with me because Derek has gotten involved with some really dangerous people, and they're demanding money I don't have. The only way to keep the children safe is to make sure Derek thinks I abandoned them and can't use them to get to me or you. I know this is horrible and I know you'll hate me, but please take care of my babies. I've hidden some evidence about Derek's other crimes in our old safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under the loose floorboard in your basement next to Dad's old workbench. If anything ever happens to me or if Derek tries to contact the children, use that evidence to protect them. I'm not a good mother, Mom, but I love them enough to disappear so they can be safe with someone who can actually take care of them. Don't try to find me. Just love them the way you always loved me, even when I didn't deserve it. Jessica. P.S. The safety deposit box is number 247. The evidence includes photos, recordings, and documents about Derek's involvement with child trafficking. He thinks I'm just another stupid addict, but I've been documenting everything. If he ever surfaces again, you'll have what you need to stop him. I read the letter 3 times, my understanding of the past 8 years, shifting completely with each word. Jessica hadn't abandoned her children out of selfishness or addiction. She'd made the ultimate sacrifice disappearing to protect them from a danger she couldn't fight alone. But that meant that Jessica who'd returned with Derek Hawthorne wasn't the same woman who'd written this letter. Either she'd forgotten the danger she'd once fled, or she'd been coerced into cooperating with the same criminal she'd tried to escape. I immediately called the number on the bottom of Brennan's business card, reaching him at home despite the late hour. "Mrs. Patterson, what's wrong?" He answered, clearly recognizing the urgency in my voice. "I found something, a letter from Jessica that explains everything. She didn't abandon the children the way we thought. She was running from Derek Hawthorne or David Hudson or whoever he really is. And there's evidence hidden in a safety deposit box that could expose his entire operation." Brennan was silent for a long moment. "Mrs. Patterson, are you saying Jessica was trying to protect the children 8 years ago, but she's working with the same criminal now? I don't know what changed, but something is very wrong. Either she's forgotten why she ran or she's being forced to cooperate against her will. We need to access that safety deposit box immediately. If Jessica documented Hudson's crimes 8 years ago, it could provide evidence about his current operation and previous victims." The next morning, armed with Jessica's letter and a court order Detective Morrison had expedited, through a cooperative judge, we opened Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank. Inside were dozens of photographs, cassette recordings, and documents that revealed the scope of David Hudson's criminal enterprise. The evidence showed Hudson had been running custody fraud schemes for over a decade, targeting single mothers with children who had access to insurance money, inheritance funds, or other assets. He would manipulate vulnerable women into cooperating with legal challenges designed to gain custody, then disappear, with both the children and their money. Most disturbing were the photographs showing children who'd been sold into illegal adoption networks or worse. Jessica had somehow documented Hudson's entire operation, including names of accomplices, bank account numbers, and locations where victimized children had been taken. "Mrs. Patterson," Detective Morrison said as we reviewed the evidence, "Jessica wasn't just trying to protect her own children 8 years ago. She was trying to expose a child trafficking ring that spans multiple states. This evidence could help us recover other missing children and prosecute dozens of criminals." But questions remained about Jessica's current involvement. Was she cooperating with Hudson voluntarily, or was she being coerced through threats to the children's safety? Had she forgotten about the evidence she'd hidden, or was she playing a longer game to finally bring down the man she'd fled from years earlier? The custody hearing was scheduled for the next morning, and I still didn't know whether Jessica was my ally or my enemy in protecting the children we both claimed to love. That night, as I sat with the 4 young adults who'd become my world, I realized I had to trust in the love and security we'd built together over 8 years. Whatever Jessica's current motivations, whatever Hudson's ultimate plan, these children deserved to know they were worth fighting for. "There's something I need to tell you all." I began holding the envelope that had hidden the truth for so many years. "About your mother, about why she really left, and about why she's really come back." The truth I'd learned was always better than uncertainty, even when it hurt. And tomorrow in that courthouse, I would make sure Judge Morrison understood that these children's safety was worth more than any legal technicality or biological claim. The trap was about to spring, but this time we were the ones setting it. The courthouse corridors buzzed with nervous energy as families waited for their cases to be called. Jessica sat on a bench near the family court entrance, wearing a conservative navy suit that looked expensive, but didn't quite fit her thin frame. David Hudson, still masquerading as Derek Hawthorne, reviewed legal documents with the confidence of a man who believed his deception was foolproof. I watched them from across the hall, surrounded by my own support team. Detective Morrison in plain clothes, federal agent Patricia Wells, who'd flown in to coordinate the arrest, and my attorney Sarah Mitchell, who now understood we weren't just fighting a custody battle, but helping to expose a criminal enterprise. Brandon, Chloe Mason, and Madison sat beside me, all of them dressed in their best clothes and wearing expressions of nervous determination. They'd spent the previous evening processing the truth about their mother's original disappearance and the current threat they faced, and their maturity in handling such devastating revelations made me proud of the young adults they'd become. "Whatever happens in there," Brandon said quietly, "we know you protected us when no one else could. That won't change no matter what any judge says." Chloe nodded agreement. "And we know the difference between someone who wants us because they love us and someone who wants us for other reasons." When our case was called, we filed into the courtroom that had become familiar territory over the years of custody proceedings. Judge Morrison took her seat with the serious expression of someone who understood the gravity of family law decisions. David Hudson rose first, presenting his final arguments with practiced eloquence. "Your Honor, this case represents the fundamental right of a mother to reunify with children. She was forced to abandon due to circumstances beyond her control. Jessica Patterson has demonstrated rehabilitation stability and genuine commitment to rebuilding relationships with her children. The court should honor the biological bond and give this family the chance to heal together." He painted a picture of Jessica as a victim of addiction who'd found the strength to overcome her demons and fight for her children's return. His presentation was polished, emotional, and convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth behind their elaborate deception. Jessica took the witness stand and delivered testimony that sounded rehearsed but heartfelt. She described years of struggle and recovery, her determination to become worthy of her children's love, and her hope for rebuilding the family that addiction had torn apart. "I know I made terrible mistakes," she said, dabbing at tears with a tissue. I know I hurt my children and my mother by disappearing the way I did, but I've spent every day of the past 8 years working to become the mother my children deserve. I'm ready now. I'm stable, employed, and committed to giving them the love they've been missing." The performance was compelling, and I could see sympathy in Judge Morrison's expression as she listened to Jessica's testimony. Without knowing about the hidden letter and safety deposit box evidence, anyone would believe this was genuine maternal love seeking redemption. When my turn came to testify, I knew I had only one chance to reveal the truth without alerting David Hudson to the criminal investigation closing in around him. "Your Honor," I began, "I'd like to present evidence that wasn't available during previous proceedings. Evidence that changes our understanding of what happened 8 years ago and what's happening now." Judge Morrison looked puzzled. "What kind of evidence, Mrs. Patterson?" I reached into my purse and withdrew the yellowed envelope, holding it carefully as if it contained something precious, which in many ways it did. A letter from Jessica written the day after she left her children with me, explaining her true reasons for disappearing. David Hudson's head snapped up, his composed expression cracking for the first time since I'd known him. Jessica's face went completely white, and her hands began trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the witness stand. "Your Honor," Hudson interjected quickly, "this alleged letter has never been entered into evidence or verified for authenticity. It could be fabricated or misinterpreted." But Judge Morrison was already reaching for the envelope. "I'll examine it myself, Mr. Hawthorne. Mrs. Patterson, please explain when and where you found this letter." I described discovering the envelope in my desk, forgotten in the chaos of suddenly caring for 4 abandoned children. As Judge Morrison read Jessica's words, her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to grim determination. "Mrs. Patterson," the judge said slowly, "this letter references evidence hidden in a safety deposit box. Has that evidence been recovered?" "Yes, Your Honor. With the assistance of law enforcement, we accessed the box yesterday. Detective Morrison is here to describe what we found." David Hudson was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I object to this dramatic presentation of unverified evidence. This appears to be an attempt to prejudice the court against my client through sensationalized accusations." But Judge Morrison silenced him with a look that could have frozen fire. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'll determine the relevance of evidence presented in my courtroom. Detective Morrison, please approach the bench." The next 30 minutes transformed the custody hearing into something closer to a criminal proceeding. Detective Morrison testified about the safety deposit box contents, the documented evidence of child trafficking, and the investigation that had identified David Hudson as a convicted criminal using a deceased attorney's identity. Jessica sat frozen in the witness chair as the truth unfolded around her. When Judge Morrison asked if she had anything to say about the letter she'd written 8 years earlier, Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to protect them. I thought if I disappeared, Derek would leave them alone. But he found me 6 months ago, and he said if I didn't help him get custody, he'd hurt my children anyway. I thought maybe I could find a way to warn you, but he never left me alone long enough to make contact." The courtroom erupted as David Hudson realized his entire scheme was collapsing. He made a desperate attempt to leave, claiming he needed to retrieve documents from his car, but federal agents were waiting outside the courthouse doors. Judge Morrison called for order and immediately suspended all custody proceedings, pending the resolution of criminal charges. She granted emergency protective orders, ensuring the children would remain in my care while the investigation continued. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, looking directly at the 4 young adults who'd sat silently through this revelation of their mother's sacrifice and current victimization, "do they know about the letter's contents?" I looked at Brandon, Chloe Mason, and Madison, these remarkable people who'd survived abandonment, found love, and now faced the complex truth about their biological mother's choices. "Not yet, Your Honor," I replied. "But they deserve to know that their mother loved them enough to disappear to protect them, and that she's been trying to protect them again, even while being coerced into this current situation. The arrests that followed made national news. David Hudson was charged with identity theft conspiracy to commit fraud, child endangerment, and multiple counts related to trafficking crimes dating back over a decade. The evidence Jessica had hidden 8 years earlier helped federal authorities identify and recover 17 children who'd been sold through Hudson's network. Jessica herself faced charges for her current involvement, but received a plea agreement in exchange for her cooperation in prosecuting Hudson and his accomplices. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in a minimum security facility with extensive psychological counseling and drug treatment programs. More importantly for our family, Jessica's letter and subsequent testimony made it clear that her original disappearance had been an act of love, not abandonment. The children struggled with complex emotions about a mother who'd sacrificed everything to protect them, but had been trapped into threatening them years later. "I understand why she made the choices she did," Chloe said during one of our family conversations about Jessica's situation, "but understanding doesn't erase 8 years of wondering if we weren't worth staying for." Brandon, now 18 and headed to college on both academic and athletic scholarships, had the most difficulty processing Jessica's story. "I'm glad she tried to protect us, but I can't forget that she stayed away even after the danger was past. She could have contacted us once Hudson was arrested the first time, but she chose to stay gone." The twins, now 16 and preparing for their senior year of high school, focused on the future rather than the past. Mason had been accepted into a prestigious performing arts program, while Madison was already organizing social justice campaigns and planning to study law. "What matters is that we're safe now," Madison said with the practical wisdom that had always defined her. "And we know the difference between someone who protects us because they love us and someone who claims to love us but puts us in danger." 1 year later, I attended Chloe's high school graduation as she prepared to begin art school on a full scholarship she'd earned through talent and determination. Brandon called from his college dorm room to share news about making the dean's list and starting as quarterback for his football team. The twins were planning their own post-graduation paths with the confidence of young adults who understood their own worth. Jessica and I exchanged letters, occasionally careful correspondence, supervised by prison authorities, but genuine in its gradual rebuilding of mother-daughter communication. She expressed gratitude for the care I'd provided her children and acceptance that I would always be their primary family connection. "I made the right choice 8 years ago," she wrote in one letter, "and you made it possible for my children to have the life I wanted them to have. I hope someday they can forgive me for the mistakes I made while trying to protect them." As I sat in my garden on a warm spring evening watching Mason practice piano through the open window, while Madison researched law schools at the kitchen table, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us together as a family. These 4 remarkable young adults had taught me that love isn't defined by biology or legal documents, but by daily choices to nurture, protect, and believe in each other. They'd shown me that children can survive abandonment and betrayal when surrounded by consistent care and genuine affection. Most importantly, they'd proven that families can be created through commitment and trust, not just born through genetics. We'd faced threats to our unity from criminals' courts and complex emotions about their origins, but our bond had grown stronger through each challenge. I thought about Robert, my husband, who died before meeting the children who'd become our legacy. He would have been proud of the family we'd built together and the young adults they'd become, despite their traumatic beginning. The trust funds that had attracted Jessica and David Hudson's criminal attention were still intact, carefully managed to support the children's educational and career goals. But the real treasure wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that we'd created something lasting and meaningful together. Brandon's recent email had included a photo of him with his college study group, all of them working on a project about family resilience. "Thanks for teaching me what real strength looks like, Grandma Tabby," he'd written. "I'm studying to become a social worker now to help other kids who need safe families like I found with you." That message captured everything I'd hoped to accomplish when I'd opened my door to 4 frightened, neglected children 8 years earlier. They were now strong, confident, compassionate young adults who understood their own worth and were ready to contribute positively to the world. As I locked the front door and turned off the porch light that had welcomed them home from school activities thousands of times over the years, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived and children well raised. We'd started as strangers brought together by crisis, but we'd become a family bound by love, trust, and mutual respect. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together with the strength that comes from knowing we belong to each other completely. Have you ever had to fight to protect a family that wasn't born from traditional circumstances, but was built through love and choice? I'd love to hear your thoughts about what really makes a family strong. Please like this video if our story touched your heart, subscribe for more real-life experiences about finding hope in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who needs to remember that families come in all forms and that love is always worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to our journey, and I wish you the courage to protect and nurture the people who matter most to you, whatever form your family takes.